Well, let's start with Liverpool. It's that time of the season where there are plenty of contracts being decided up and down the land. We'll get to De Bruyne later, but first, Liverpool announced a 2-year extension for Mo Salah on Friday. Beth, it's the end of yet another long-running Mohamed Salah contract saga, but I guess there was no real surprise in the end that this worked out the way it did.
Yeah, it's felt like most of the season, to be honest, that there's been an expectation in and around the club that Mohamed Salah would commit to a new deal. But then, obviously, the longer it goes on and, there's external speculation, obviously Saudi Arabia have been very interested in him for a number of years now. So until it was done, you always were sort of slightly reluctant to say it was going to happen. But yeah, ultimately it was. I was down at the training ground for Slot's press conference last Friday, and it just felt like the whole place had been given a little bit of a lift, really, by that news. Players, manager, fans. I think it sounds cliche to say it's like a new signing, but I think keeping Mo Salah for another 2 years is as good as signing a £50 million new player, because the sort of form that he's been in this season, he's almost a guarantee of goals. And I suppose the risk of giving players above the age of 30 long contracts or new contracts is that their form might tail off, and of course that might prove to be the case for Mo Salah over the next 2 years. But he is someone who keeps himself in peak physical condition. He's shown no signs of dropping off this season, certainly, and I think his numbers are so good that he could afford to have a little bit of a drop-off and still probably be getting you 20 goals a season, which, I'm sure Rob, covering Manchester United, will know it's not easy to get at strikers that can come in and produce those numbers. So, yeah, so great news for Liverpool. And I think, against West Ham, you could sort of see in that first half in particular, he just sort of seemed buoyed by the news being out and that sort of weight being off his shoulders. I'm sure it'll be nice for him not to have to field questions on his contract every week now. So yeah, for everyone involved with Liverpool, it was a big day and a big moment in the season.
So what changed, Beth? Because obviously he was giving the noises, and I know he's a bit of a master manipulator when it comes to sort of suggesting he's more out than in, and he's maybe trying to drive up his wage offerings and contract lengths and whatever. I mean, he wouldn't have gone into this wanting 2 years, right? He would have wanted longer than 2 years. So what changed? Did he compromise? Did Liverpool end up giving him more money? What was the sort of catalyst for finding the agreement?
Well, I think the club, ultimately, they've dealt with this as they have with this contract situations of Virgil van Dijk and Trent Alexander-Arnold, sort of shrouded in secrecy, really. But sort of from speaking to various people at the club over the last couple of weeks, because there have been some reports that Salah had taken a pay cut. I've been told that was never on the agenda, and that pretty much from the beginning of negotiations, despite the noises that Salah might have made to the TV cameras and things, that both his camp and Liverpool were fairly confident that they were going to reach an agreement eventually. So, some of those noises coming out from Salah earlier in the year, maybe that was just a little bit of gameplay, and maybe it was sort of forcing the club's hand a little bit. I think maybe in an ideal world he might have wanted longer than 2 years. I think ultimately, he is in a different position, as is Virgil van Dijk to Trent Alexander-Arnold, whereby, Real Madrid obviously massively interested in Alexander-Arnold and a clear avenue for him to follow. I suppose for Van Dijk and Salah, the fact that they are a little bit older maybe gives the club a stronger negotiating hand, because for Salah, really, it was probably Saudi or Liverpool, and ultimately he's decided he wants to stay and compete at the highest level. So yeah, I think maybe when those first noises came out from him back in November, I think he didn't maybe feel like the club were being as proactive as they could have been in terms of approaching him and really being aggressive, trying to commit into a new deal. But from what I've heard, mostly the negotiations, that they've always felt like there was going to be an agreement reached.
Rob, what do you think this sends out as a message to the rest of the Premier League that Salah's staying for another 2 years in a team that is, virtually certain now to win the league?
Well, it's massive. I think that if he had left, you severely weaken Liverpool. I mean, the cost to replace someone like that, who is such a regular goal scorer, would run into the hundreds of millions, and it's debatable whether Liverpool have got that money to spend. I think it's been difficult for Liverpool, having three massive contracts all coming up at the same time, and you can make the argument, it obviously looks like Trent is going to go to Real Madrid, and you can make the argument that they've made a mistake there, because obviously Salah and Van Dijk are beyond the age of 30, so coming to the end of their careers, where Trent, in theory, is at the peak of his powers. Well, actually, you know, Trent is a right back, and they've already got Conor Bradley there. Right backs don't cost as much as centre halves and strikers. I actually think when the rest of the Premier League, you know, look at Liverpool's squad in the summer, the one that Liverpool probably could afford to lose is Trent. They probably couldn't afford to lose Van Dijk and Mo Salah. And, you know, Liverpool will obviously go on and win the league. And when the predictions come out for what's going to happen next year, I think most people are going to pick Liverpool to win the league because, you know, they've done it this year. They've kept their two star men in Van Dijk, or it certainly looks like they're going to keep Van Dijk, and they are going to keep Salah, and they're going to strengthen again in the summer. And that just shows you how important it is. I think that if Salah had gone, there would have been a kind of a gap there maybe for an Arsenal or a Man City to kind of claw the way back into that conversation. Obviously, there still is. You know, you can't, you know, hand out titles for next year already. I just think it's a little bit perhaps demoralising for the rest. I mean, you just look at the way that Pep Guardiola answered the question about Mo Salah's contract on Friday. You could tell in his kind of body language and the way he answered it, it's just a little bit like, ugh. You know, he would never admit it, but his job at Man City would be immeasurably easier if Mo Salah's not in that Liverpool team, and that says everything about how important he is to Liverpool.
Beth, Rob mentioned there about it being potentially a big summer for Liverpool. You spoke to Virgil van Dijk after the game on Sunday, and he said it was going to be just that. I mean, how did you interpret those quotes?
Yeah, I think it's interesting because Virgil van Dijk isn't the first person connected with the club to sort of hint that it will be a big summer. Arne Slot has spoken. He spoke a couple of months ago, I think, to the BBC, and he said that, you know, it had been obviously a quiet summer window last summer. They brought in Mamardashvili, but he obviously stayed on loan at Valencia. They brought in Federico Chiesa, who has been, you know, he's made just a handful of appearances. So essentially, Slot has been working with Klopp's team basically, and he made a point of saying, you know, we wanted to highlight targets for the summer, and we've done that. And yeah, Virgil van Dijk yesterday seemed pretty bullish almost in his insistence that this will be a big summer for Liverpool. And you would imagine that has maybe played a factor in him wanting to stick around, in Mo Salah wanting to stick around. You know, Salah was quite adamant in his quotes when his contract was announced that he feels Liverpool can be competing for the biggest titles, not just this season, but for years to come. And otherwise he wouldn't have committed his future there. And so you would like to think that they maybe have assurances from the club that they are going to be proactive in the transfer market. They've had a quiet few windows now. And I do think, you know, Rob mentioned sort of City and Arsenal clawing the way back. You know, I certainly think next season both of those teams will be stronger, and Liverpool can't afford to sort of rest on their laurels. There's a couple of areas of really clear improvement needed in the squad. They need a left back, absolutely, and they probably need a number 9. You would think Darwin Núñez is probably going to be on his way out this summer, so there's probably still 3 or 4 players I think who could come in and make this team and this squad better, which is I guess maybe a little bit of a worry for the rest of the Premier League, because I still think this team has levels to go under Slot, but also, you know, it depends very much on whether they get that recruitment right this summer.
Now, we are recording this early in the week, and Virgil van Dijk has dropped a pretty strong hint that he's likely to reveal his next move. So are we looking at, of the two left, Trent and Van Dijk, one staying and one going? What's the latest on both of them, please?
Yeah, so I mean, that has been the general consensus for a little while now, I think. The sort of the silence around Trent Alexander-Arnold is probably pretty deafening. You know, as people have spoken to at the club over the past few weeks have been insistent that even when sort of those reports came out from Spain that essentially a deal had been done, you know, there's been nothing tangible as of yet that Liverpool can comment on. When there is, you know, I'm sure they'll be in a position to say that exactly what's happening. But certainly all of the noise does seem to indicate that Trent will be leaving unless there is a drastic U-turn over the next few weeks. Virgil van Dijk, you know, as good as said really yesterday that he is staying. He was quite coy. He obviously wouldn't answer it directly. But it's all signs now pointing to him signing a 2-year contract at Liverpool, which is massive. He's, you know, not just incredibly important as a footballer, but I think as a leader in the way that he commands And he has this presence about him on the pitch, I think is so important. I think he's probably, Arne Slot's most important player. He's someone who he looks to. I think he's been incredibly useful in terms of almost plugging a little bit of that void that's been left by Klopp in terms of his sort of leadership and his charisma. I think Van Dijk has almost stepped up to the plate and helped Slot with that a little bit. So I think his importance is massive to Liverpool, and a real coup to get him to stay for another 2 years.